Hey everybody, this is Noe with Walk with Yah. Not sure if I'm live yet, so I might say that again. Okay. Hey everybody, this is Noe with Walk with Yah. Glad you could make it. Let me turn that off so we don't get any feedback there. Um, let's make some adjustments here. Let's get rid of that screen. Let's make some, take this, and we're going to do a little magic here. There we go. Now you can see me. This is what I look like. And we're going to minimize this. How does that look? Nope, other direction. Okay. No, this is the way I wanted to do it. Sorry. Try that again. There we go. Voila. And get that up. Okay. So, welcome to the From the First to the Third Heavens Bible study, which is on Zoom. So you can join in if you'd like to show your mug and participate, ask questions, give your comments, and just be part of the fun. So today we got a lot to cover, and so we may not get to it all. That's okay. Again, you can go out to if you follow the links, I put the descriptions that I have in various different places. All these, my notes and stuff like that, I put out there on the Walk with Yah Google Drive, and that way you can download them. And if we don't cover it, you can kind of see some of the things that we might have covered if we don't get to them. But glad that you are here. Hope that you survived Halloween. Um, yeah, I didn't. I turned off the lights, and so um, I had one piece of candy. And so, anyways, let us get started. So, I'm going to share my screen here. Voila. Okay. Take that, move that over here. There we go. And let me just check something right here, right quick. All right, it's got to have YouTube up. Okay, in case someone puts comments on there, because I have not figured out how to disable the comments on YouTube. Okay, I think I got it. I think I know what I'm doing, which is scary. All right, so if you have looked at the calendar, you'll see, again, we're going to be going over Genesis, start with Genesis 12. How about I pull up a slide so that way you can see this? Okay, so we're going to go over Noach, Noach, which means to rest, to find comfort. That's kind of like the basis of my name. When I kind of find it funny that that's my name, Noe. And so when God told me to become a deliverance minister, he originally told me to be a counselor. And I was like, okay. And I was like, in my mind, I think that that means psychiatry or psychology because that's what you mean. And it took me a long time to figure out that's not what he meant. And so, because I made my assumptions, I kind of just went off and ran with it. And so, yeah, I try to uh, help people find their spiritual comfort remove it from their spiritual oppression. That's obviously also based in large part on the Bible. because that is our weapon, our sword, which is why we're doing this Bible study, because we need to know. We see all the things going on in the world, but those are really uh, just the Bible kind of being played out, all its principles, all its things that it tells us, because God created this world. Yeah, there we go. Because God created this world and he knows how it works. And so if you don't know the foundation, I'm not talking just the apostolic writings, I'm talking about all the rest of the book as well. If you don't know all that stuff, you're not going to be as well equipped as you need to be to get your blessings. Because that's kind of what this world is, to kind of prove what his word says, because he created it. Okay, so we see the verses there for Noach that we're going to that I have slides for, and then Lecha, probably not pronouncing that right, which means go for yourself or to go forth. And in case you're wondering where these names come from, in the Parsha studies, the very first words generally of the where they leave off, that next chapter, that next verse, is where they usually get the names from for these studies, just in case you're wondering. All right, go back to the screen. There we go. So, so in Noach, I'm just again pulling a few verses out of the Bible study that um, I wanted to focus on. And in Genesis 6, we start with Noah and the flood. And it talks about the genealogy of Noah, and it says, Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations, that he walked with Elohim, with God. And then God says, hey, I will establish my covenant with you. And I have a question there, or some questions. Is righteousness given or earned? And I talked about this in one of the uh, Walk with Yah shorts that I did, S79. Is righteousness given or earned? And to be honest, it's a trick question because it's a little bit of both. And so we actually have to live his word. And um, when we do that, we get more righteousness. And I'll cover that a little bit more later on. Um, and so you can say that you believe, but words are cheap, right? And so also the Bible says that Noah was perfect in his generations. And just want to point out that perfect doesn't mean sinless. It means being perfect in your attitude towards him. Like if you do sin, it's like, okay, well, you need to repent and do all the stuff. And so, Yah, God knew that we're not him, we're going to mess up. And so it's just to have the right attitude towards him, being humble, of wanting to learn, of letting him be in charge, of trying to follow him. That's kind of what being perfect means. And then it says Noah walked with Elohim. I think we've talked about this before. I'll say it again though. To walk with is the Hebrew thought halakha, which is how do you carry out his commands. And so when you typically see that word walk, just kind of keep that in your mind. It's like, oh, they could be saying this. And so the question 3 that I have there is, what is dispensationalism? Uh, and so there were some people a long time ago, I think it was John Darby, I think, um, that introduced this concept of like, oh, there was different times in the Bible where God created different covenants. Like there was the covenant that God made with Abraham, and then he made another one with Noah, and then he made another one here, and then he did another one here. Like he changed everything up. No. And so, because if you start following that path of dispensationalism, it starts going down some, it says some things that the Bible is not intending to say. I'm not going to get all into that right now, but there's just one covenant. And so we might go over that a little bit later also as well. In Genesis 7, we see here that um, Yah says to Noah, go into the ark because I've seen that you're righteous. Again, not because he just had faith, but he actually did stuff. Um, and he proved his righteousness. And so, and here we see in Genesis 7:2, it says, of all the clean beasts, you take this many, and none of the unclean beasts, you take this many. And so that kind of raises a question, which I didn't write down, is, well, then hold on, the Torah wasn't actually codified to Exodus 20, but this is way before that in Genesis 7. And so we could even go prior to that and go back to the garden, when Cain and Abel are giving sacrifices. And so what kind of comes up is that throughout history, yeah, God is slowly teaching people like this is kind of what's required. It may not always be um, explicitly stated, but we see it again here. The clean and unclean beast is like, whoa, 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 hold on. When was that defined? But we don't know when exactly, but that it is. And so, and then also we see in Genesis 4:4 that, again, regarding Cain and Abel, they brought their offerings. And so Yah has been teaching us to follow his commands since the beginning. Um, because the Torah, if you didn't know it, it means instruction, teaching, or guidance. Again, we see being taught from the beginning. Okay, Genesis 7:17. And the flood was on the earth 40 days. And there's a lot of numbering going on at that time. The floods came down for 100 and, or, there was a statement there about 150 days and all this stuff. Even with the first days of creation, Genesis 1 is like, well, there's 7 days. And so many believers know that there's, Yah has the thing with numbers. And sometimes the numbers mean something. Um, you know, 7, perfection, 8, the number of man, um, you know, tens, threes, all different types of things. And there are, 12 is a big number. And so we know that there are numbers that have significance in the Bible. And there's actually messages in that, commonalities. Some people might call them fractals. And so, which is just repeating numbering, systems. And so the question is there a heavenly numbering system, or what some may refer to as Gematria? And so there is a kosher um, numbering system in the Bible. However, some people take that a little bit too far, in my opinion. They take it to mean gematria, because in all the Hebrew letters, they also are numbers as well. And so what they end up doing is kind of like a Bible math using uh, the letters as numbers. So they're like, hey, if this sentence or this word equals this amount of number, this verse over here kind of equals the same number. So therefore, there's a tie that they have together. They're related, they're equal. And sometimes that will lead you to some bad theology, things that were never intended to be, that the Bible is never intended to say. And so just be a little bit careful with that if you start going down that path. And so they'll make it sound very believable, but I would be careful if I were you. So there is a kosher numbering system, yes, Uh, and I can't say I know what it is. I can't say that every number, you know, means something. I don't know. Okay, so in Genesis 8, we see that the flood subsides, and you see all my coloring there. And then we go to Genesis 8:20. And again, we're talking about the clean beasts and every clean bird. And Noah's offering burnt offerings. And Yah smells these offerings. Um, and he says in his heart, never again shall I curse the ground. Because, although the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth, um, I will never smite all living creatures as I have done as long as the earth remains. But again, he will never do it that way, which is by water. And so he will do it again by fire. And so, um, and regarding the ground in Romans 8, I think 15, it says that the earth, the ground, is groaning, awaiting for the sons of God to manifest themselves, because the earth is under a curse and it's waiting for us to take our rightly part and okay, maybe it wasn't 8. To do what we were called to do, to banish the evil, to take dominion that we were called to do, and get rid of the evil that's in the earth, which is all the unclean spirits. So until that happens, the earth is under a curse and it's groaning. Okay. Then we see in Genesis 9, this is interesting. It says here that every moving creature that lives is food for you, but do not eat flesh with its life, its blood. But, only your food for your life shall require. Um, from the hand of every beast, I require it. So, in other words, even if the beasts, if they kill an animal, or if the beasts kill a person, rather, God's like, look, I'm going to require it from you also as well, um, because we are so precious as people, and it's all about the blood, which is why I think so many people, the whole COVID thing, the transhumanism stuff, a big part of that is because it's about the blood. Won't go into those details there. Not even sure I know them all myself, but because we are made in the image of Elohim. If I get to it, which I may or may not today, I had a viewer ask me a question about that. Like, what does it mean to be one with the Godhead? So we might get to that today. Um, but one of the things I wanted to point out says here, every moving creature that lives is food for you. But, and that was for a time. For whatever reason, that changed um, because the kosher laws about food were not given until later, until Leviticus 11. But at this point in time in Genesis, it's like, okay, every moving creature you're allowed to eat. Um, I don't know, I haven't heard of a teaching of where that changed, why it changed, uh, but I just kind of find it interesting. And so one of the questions I have here also is um, because in Genesis, 9 there, it's like, hey, if whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood is shed. And this often leads into a question about what's the difference between killing and murder, because there is a difference. And so with killing, it's basically unintentional. It could be in self-defense. It could be by accident. And so you accidentally kill the person. Um, if you murder someone, even killing could be, hey, you're fighting for the land, again, self-defense. It could be your country, you're told to do this. Whereas murder is with an evil, breaking the law intent, out of revenge, out of jealousy, something like that. So just a little heads up there. It's not all the same. Um, in Genesis 9, it talks about, go there. Nope. Okay. So you see there Noah blessing his sons and stuff. And then, yeah, God speaking to Noah, hey, I'm establishing my covenant with you. Um, Never again is flesh cut off by the waters. And never again is there a flood to destroy. So he's elaborating more on what he just said prior to. Again, next time it will be by fire. Um, and he goes, hey, here's the sign of the covenant between me and you. And this is where he kind of makes the rainbow. And so to me, I'm like, okay, well, when it rains, we still see rainbows in the earth. And I'm like, okay, well, that tells me that that covenant is still intact, which again, to me, speaks against dispensationalism. Um, but this also says something very interesting here that Yah, God, has a covenant with every living creature also as well, and the earth. How does that work? I don't know. He obviously speaks a language that with them has a connection that we're not necessarily all privy to, although some people are very connected to animals and or the land. I just find that kind of interesting. It's like, oh, okay. So in Genesis 9, again, we were talking about the rainbow. And so the rainbow, we know that if you take the light and you put it through the white light, put it through a prism, it comes out in 7 different colors. They've actually tried to change that, I think, to 8, but originally 7. And so, and you may have heard me talk before about the redemptive gifts, and they are illustrated also by the colors. You see, I have it listed there: prophet red, servant orange, etc. And so each of those different colored versions of ourselves, of our spirit, because we have 7, our spirit is divided into 7 different sections. If you need more understanding on that, please go to the Walk with Yah, uh, watch some of the videos there. I have a playlist on YouTube about the redemptive gifts where I kind of explain that. Um, but that's illustrated by the rainbow and also in many other places in the Bible, but you may not see it right away. I'm just going to point to a verse right there, Proverbs 9, verse 1, where it says, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out its 7 columns. And so, and many times in the Bible, our house, a temple, a tent, actually represents us. And so, and those are some of the 7 columns within us are our different human spirit portions. Okay. So then let's see. Noah's descendants. They want to leave that alone for right now. Um, So here, I'll just say Ham gets defiled because he sees the nakedness of his father. And it seems, and the Bible doesn't really get into it, uh, but if you can kind of read between the lines, um, it seems like Noah was sexually defiled by Ham. And so it's interesting that Noah curses Ham's son Canaan and not Ham directly. So there's some discussion about that. Like maybe that was the worst way to get to Ham was to curse his son. And so, anyways, that Canaanite bloodline was defiled because of that curse, uh, which is why a lot of times in the Bible you see the Israelites are fighting the people, the very you know, different tribes from Canaan, and so and then Noah blesses Shem, whose bloodline, you know, Yeshua, Jesus comes from Shem's bloodline, and so do I want to get into this Revelation 12:4? Trying to remember the point that I was trying to make with that. I had it when I was writing it up. Um, oh yeah, yeah. So in Revelation 12:4, we see that the great fiery dragon draws a third of the stars. And some of the stars, just so you know, aren't always messengers or angels, or in that case, to turn those messengers into be unclean spirits. In the Bible, many places, few places, with Abraham, Yah's like, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, or with Joseph, who has his dreams, um, and he sees his father and his brothers uh, as stars. Sometimes in the Bible, we are represented as stars. Us people are, I'm guessing that means our human spirit at some point in time, which was created before we actually became a soul and body. Anyways, um, when Ham and his son Canaan was cursed, that's 1/3 of the people that were on the earth, because the people on the earth, we all came from one of those three bloodlines, because they had to repopulate the earth at that point in time. The flood wiped everyone out and they had to repopulate it. So I just found it very interesting that Ham, Canaan's bloodline cursed, Shem, Japheth's not. And in Revelation 12:4, we see Satan drawing a third of the stars. I'm like, might there be some type of relation there? Maybe, I don't know. Just a thought. Okay, so in Noach 5, um, I'm sorry, in Genesis 10, um, we see there that everyone was divided according to their language. But that's kind of a little bit of foresight about what goes on in Genesis 10, which is the Tower of Babel. And so we basically see in Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, that he's like, hey, if these people, they kind of get together, they're going to be able to do whatever. And it's believed that the people at the time were trying to um, make a tower to go up to the heavens to, it's believed that they were trying to make sacrifices to these other false gods, because Yah's like, I don't like this. Like, we need to stop it. We need to confuse it. And so they were doing a lot of pagan worship with this type of stuff. But, I got a little bit of a prepper mindset myself, because I think things are going to go a little bit south. Actually, that's what the Bible says. And I think we're getting close to those times, uh, with all the AI and medicine and all this type of stuff, big pharma, whatever. trying to attack the blood and get in our blood and stuff, that I just want us to think about that Yah is in control because they had a plan, and Yah's like, well, I'll take care of it like that. Am I saying it's always going to be that easy? No. But he is in control. And so Yah has historically, at times, intervened and done, dealt with the unclean spirits, but he wants to typically do the stuff through us. We see that he did that in Exodus with, the Hebrews that were going all against Pharaoh and the Egyptian gods. But that's when things get really, really bad. So, but he ultimately he wants to work through us. Okay, moving on to Genesis 11, talks about Shem's descendants, Terah's descendants, and then we're going to the Haftarah, which is Isaiah 54. Go there if I need to. I'm going to take my caps lock off. Okay. So in Isaiah 54, Yah is basically telling his people, look, I have forsaken you, but with great compassion I will gather you. I was mad for a moment, but with an everlasting kindness I shall come, back to you. And then we see, for this is the waters of Noah to me, that the waters would never again cover the earth. So I have sworn not to be wroth with you, nor to rebuke you. So the Parsha studies, uh, they're usually trying to show a theme, and so that's part of the theme that brings us to Isaiah. And so Isaiah also talks about the covenant of peace, the Torah that he's still referring to. Is like, hey, haven't forgot about this. My covenant's not shaken; it's still intact. And then he says in Isaiah 54:11, this is kind of neat, I think. Um, Kind of has a spiritual, supernatural tone to it. Yah says, I'm setting your stones in antimony, and shall lay your foundations with sapphires, and shall make your battlements of rubies, your gates of crystals, and your walls of precious stones. And so, some kind of way, we know that stones and stuff like that have a uh, particular significance to Yah, to God. We see in the book of Revelation that there's gates of pearls, that the roads will be made of like a gold. At places it talks about sapphire and stuff like that. Um, so when I see this here, I'm like, oh, in some kind of way, to our spirit, we have stones also as well. And so we see stones in the breastplate of the high priest. He was wearing an ephod, and so that represented the 12 tribes. So when you think about witches and warlocks and all those types of folks that do that stuff, Yah, God had them first. They just perverted, what was originally intended. And so because he is light, he filters different aspects of himself through these stones, gems, because they put out a different light or a different aspect of him. And so just something to think about. Um, Here's something in Isaiah 54:17 that I thought was very interesting, where it says, and a lot of people quote this verse, no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you. Well, people typically stop right there. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And they kind of leave off the rest of it, which says, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment, you shall prove wrong. That this is the inheritance of the servants of God and their righteousness from me, declares God. A lot of times, yeah, God just doesn't do stuff because it's wrong. because he was trying to give us dominion over the earth. A lot of times we have to deal with what's wrong because we're like spiritual cops. We have to take it to him and be like, hey, this is wrong. This is not right. Sometimes we might have to confront the demons directly. Sometimes people might go through more of a courts of heaven type of deal, which isn't so much confronting the unclean spirits as much. But we have to remind God of his word, be like, this is what it says, and stand on that. Okay, the apostolic writings for the first half here. Um, let's see what time we're at. Okay. Um, okay, just pull out this one verse here, Matthew 26. This is Yeshua. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, I believe, where he falls on his face and says, oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I desire, but as you desire. Watch and pray lest you enter the trial, because the spirit indeed is eager, but the flesh is weak. And so part of being a real, true Christian, a believer, a disciple, is to kind of empty ourselves so he can fill it, which means our desires, things that we want to say, judgments that we want to make, which isn't easy to do a lot of times. And so we have to give up our will to his will because his will is greater. And our human spirit wants to do this. And in ministry, I'm sometimes dealing with people's human spirits, and sometimes they're like, I don't agree with what the soul's doing, what the body's doing. Is like, I don't like that. And sometimes the human spirit, they might get tricked or get overpowered and be like, we're kind of forced to do this as I'm talking to people's human spirit portions. They're like, we kind of knew it was wrong, but what can we do? And so we it's best for us. And it's not like he wants us to be slaves, but he has the best things planned for us when we give up ourselves to him. Once our soul learns that that is the best path, then our human spirit can really start to mature. Because really, when our human spirit is mature enough, it needs to be getting the direction from the Godhead, uh, which then get passed to our human spirit, which then should get passed down to our soul and body, which hopefully come into alignment and discover that this is the best way to do it. But there's a lot of dying to our flesh that has to happen for that to occur, for us to reach our destiny, for us to get our greatest sense of fulfillment. Okay, did I drive that one home enough? And so, all right, let's move on. All right, Lecha. Um, let's see, Genesis 12. Let's see if I can type. Have I still got caps lock on? Okay, it's off now. The call of Abram. And so this is Yah prophesying over Abram. I shall do this and I shall do that. Because prophecy, ideally, is basically Yah going, this is what I would like to happen. Um, Sometimes we can muck that up and it won't happen the way he wants it. And other times it's going to happen regardless of what we do. But let's go. Okay. Genesis 13 talks about Abram and Lot, how they separate. Genesis 14, Abram rescues Lot. And in Genesis 14, we see that one of Lot's people comes to Abram and says, hey, like they've been, uh, Lot and all the people of that land, they've been captured. And I'm coming to you, Abram. Abram the Hebrew, the Bible states. here's a question. What does it mean to be a Hebrew? Now, I have um, a more, who is not amor like love, but the Hebrew word, um, a more, which is kind of like a traveling rabbi, whereas a rabbi's assigned to a specific congregation, a more kind of travels around. Anyways, his specialty is linguistics, and he once told me, he's like, well, the root word in Hebrew for Hebrew is aber, which means to cross over. So when we become a Hebrew ourselves, what we're doing is we're crossing over from living our way to living the way that Yah wants us to. Again, that dying to flesh. Okay, Genesis 14. All right. Abraham is blessed by Melchizedek. And so Melchizedek is this very interesting character that kind of comes out of nowhere. Um, and Abram recognizes him as a priest. Um, he is a priest, and he's also a prophet, which is very unusual. And so Melchizedek, watch this, he blesses Abram, and then he blesses the Most High El, what we might call Father Yah, God the Father. And then we see that Abram gives Melchizedek a tenth of all that he has. This is where we get the concept of tithing. And so, I'm sorry, Melchizedek was, it means king of righteousness, and he was a king and a priest. Sorry. I said prophet earlier, which is very unusual because uh, those are typically two roles that you do not have together. We've seen in the Bible, else other places where a king takes on a priestly role, kind of like Saul did. Samuel was not happy about that, and I think that's when uh, Saul actually that was like it. Uh, God's like, all right, I'm going to strip you. We're done, and so I'm going to strip you of your kinghood, your kingship, and so we see in verses like Psalm 110, verse 4, Hebrews chapters 5 through 8, uh, even Hebrews 7, verse 3, that this Melchizedek could be a pre incarnate version of Yeshua himself, because it says here that Melchizedek was without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but having been made like the son of Elohim, remains a priest for all time, which sounds just like, yep, Yeshua. Sounds just like Jesus. And so it's like, oh, he actually made a pre-incarnate uh, cameo appearance on the earth, prior to him being born. And this actually happens in several different places in the Tanakh, um, uh, the Old Testament. And so again, in Hebrews 7, we see that Yeshua is compared to Melchizedek. And so this starts this long conversation, you know, where it's just talking about how the two are alike and how and what does that mean? And so, according to the Torah, there's a better covenant, all this type of stuff. And it ends in Hebrews 8:12. And these verses here get twisted a lot of times. Because the Bible says, because I shall forgive their unrighteousness and their sins and their lawlessness or Torahlessness, I shall no longer remember. By saying renewed, because he's talking about, the covenant here, he has made the first old. Now, what becomes old and growing aged is near disappearing. So, what's actually happening here? It's not necessarily the covenant that's being renewed or that's changing. Um, what the first that is becoming old is the administration. Because now that Yeshua has come and he's died, he's sacrificed, he gave the perfect sacrifice for us. All that, you know, sacrifices, it plays a different role now. And so what is changing, what's becoming new is the administration of the Torah, how things are done, because in many other places in the Bible, it states that the Torah is still intact. So that old administration, like no longer do we need any Levites, do we need an earthly high priest, because Yeshua is now the ultimate high priest. And that's what Hebrews 7 and 8 are about. And so that tends to get twisted, and people are like, well, no, that's the Torah is done away with. No, you got to read it in a bigger context there. And so take that as you will, but that's kind of what I get out of it, and many others. And so when we look at Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, here's something else that's kind of neat. What is Salem? And Salem is the original Jerusalem. And I got a few verses there that you can look that up. And so thought that was kind of interesting. In Genesis 15, God then makes a covenant with Abram. And he comes to Abram in a vision, says, I'm your shield. Your reward is exceedingly great. Count the stars if you're able to count them. Again, your descendants are going to be like this. Again, we talked about that earlier. And he's like, sow your seed. Um, and he believed in God, and Yah reckoned to him for righteousness. But question for you. Was it just um, Abraham's belief? Was it just in his mind that, and that was it? And God's like happy with that? Or who or what did Abram have faith in? What did he do with that faith? And we need to not forget where it says in Genesis 26:4. Again, he's talking about this, they're kind of rehashing just a little bit of this. And we're talking to Abraham at this point. Your seeds, like the stars of the heaven, will be like your seed will be like the stars of the heaven. And in all, your seed, in your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice. He guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, my Torah. And Torah is if I'm saying that right, is the plural of Torah, which means, again, instruction, guidance, teaching, or to make straight. So when we have enough faith to be obedient, to actually believe what he says, that is accounted to our righteousness. Okay, Genesis 15, God makes a covenant with Abram. That's where he cuts the animals and puts Abram asleep. And Yah's basically saying, like, I'm going to do this. Don't, you're not really going to be held too accountable, at least to make this covenant happen. Like, I will make it happen. And so God prophesies over Abraham and his descendants. And he says, your seed are to be sojourners in a land that is not theirs. But the nation who they will serve, you know, that's Egypt. He says that, um, they're going to be sojourners and that they're going to get afflicted for 400 years. But the nation who they serve, again, Egypt, I am going to judge. And afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. Then in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the crookedness of the Amorites is not yet complete. There's a lot going on here. And so um, I believe myself that we're kind of in here is talking about the Exodus and what's going to happen. I believe myself that we're coming into a second Exodus. That basically that there's the time of the tribulation that the odds will be so stacked against us that Yeshua is going to have to come back and that he's going to judge and that we're going to have to we're going to be afflicted and we're going to come out with great possessions though. Um, that there's a lot of evil people in the world and their sin is accruing. And so, anyways, Genesis 16, Sarah and Hagar. Um, Basically, to make the story somewhat short, uh, Yah prophesied over Abram, hey, you will have a son, and he'll be a blessing to all the world. And Sarah was like, hey, we need to help God. Um, Abram, I want you to sleep with my maidservant Hagar. But that was done totally by the flesh. And so Hagar births her son called Ishmael. Um, but then, yeah, God's like, nope, that's not what I said. That's not the way I wanted to do it. You kind of came up with your own ideas. And so Abram and Sarah have their own son, Isaac. And so Sarah kind of gets jealous and is like, hey, you're not going to share in the inheritance with my natural born son, so we're going to cast you away. Hagar and your son Ishmael. And so the Muslim people tend to they believe that Ishmael is a prophet, and I don't know exactly where he plays in their role of their beliefs. Um, I think I'll just leave that alone for now. But basically, it's interesting though that yeah, God even blesses Hagar in Ishmael, and so God tells Hagar, hey, go back to your mistress and humble yourself under her hand. And he goes, I'm going to increase you, your seed greatly, too numerous to be counted. Also gives her the same, you know, prophecies he kind of did Abraham, and you'll have a son, you shall call him Ishmael. Um, I remember one time when I was in the corporate world, I had a particular leader of the department that was really coming out against me. I'm sure he thought he was right. I thought he was wrong. And I really wanted to leave that company at that time. I'm like, this is totally jacked up. And I'd pray on it, and Yah was like, nope, you need to stay. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. And this went on for, I don't know, 8 months or so. And so I had to do a lot of work, put in a lot of hours for something that I did not agree with. And I believe that Yah God was trying to teach me something there about authority, about being obedient to Him. I learned a lot during the process. Um, and I made it through. Didn't like it, but I did make it through. So sometimes if you're in a situation before you know, tap out, Yah might be trying to teach you something. So just something to think about. And so in Genesis 17:1, we see here that when Abram was 99 years old, that Yah God appears to him again, says, I am El Shaddai, which means in Hebrew, a strong breast, or meaning that he's a nurturer, that he can feed you, he can take care of you, is kind of like how we kind of translate that. Says, walk before me and be perfect. Again, walk, how to carry out the commands. Be perfect in your attitude towards me, not sinless. And he tells, Abraham, hey, I'm going to give my covenant between you and she'll greatly increase you. And again, he's like, look, you're going to bless all the nations, but you're going to do that by doing my covenant. And so we're going to be in a covenant relationship, which is really important to Yah, to God. And so in Matthew 5:48, even Yeshua says, be perfect. Again, not sinless, perfect in attitude. In Genesis 17, verse 4, Yah says, okay, we're going to change your name from Abram to Abraham because you're going to be the father of many nations. And, again, I will make nations out of you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant. Well, who was Abraham's seed? It's all of the nations that came from him. So Yah is saying here, my covenant I'm establishing with your seed after you in their generations. In other words, the whole world needs to be doing the Torah. Okay. So in the Haftarah, Isaiah 40:27 through 41, verse 16, I was saying earlier that, I foresee that we as believers are going to start getting more condemned by the world. But I got some verses here in Isaiah 40:41 that's basically saying, hey, I am Yah, your God. Like, my understanding's unsearchable. I neither faint nor am I weary, and I am here to help you. And so all these sentences here, all these lines here talk about, like, don't fear. I will be with you. I will strengthen you. And so even when the Israelites, they would get him ticked off. At some point in time, yes, God will turn against you if you push him that far. He really does not want that. He wants us to have that relationship with him, but he's also like, look, after my anger passes, I will help you. I will give you a supernatural strength. Don't forget about me. Don't rule me out. So, he is our helper. And so he is the deliverer. He likes to do that. So just a reminder there. Um, in the apostolic writings, we've got Romans 3:19 through 5 or 6, and it says here, it talks about, we're going to talk about the righteousness of Yah, God, through faith. And it basically says that, whatever the Torah says to those who are in the Torah, um, that all the world shall come under judgment before Elohim. And Romans 3:20 says, therefore, by works of Torah, no flesh shall be declared right before him. For by the Torah is the knowledge of sin. And so it gets a little confusing if you don't know what the wording means. So the works of the Torah are basically thinking that if you do the Torah, like, that's going to save you. Like, if I just base it on my good works, like, hey, I'm doing this And, therefore I am so much a better person than you are because, you know, you have belief, but I have works. That is not going to cut it because you're just relying on yourself. You're not relying on the Creator. And the Torah was given, and it says in Galatians, which I don't have that verse here, it was given because of sin. That's why the Torah was given. Because Yah's like, look, y'all are going to tick me off. I'm going to destroy all you if I don't give you some rules, if you don't learn my heart. And so the Torah, um, it kind of teaches us what Yah's heart's about. Like, this is what sin looks like. Like, if you do this, go against what I'm telling you not to do, that's sin. Don't do it. And so, but there's also a Torah, a belief that we believe in God, that He will save us. This is the other side of the coin, that when we put our faith in Him above our own works, then the Torah is a good thing. For we reckon, in Romans 3:28, we reckon that man is declared right by belief without works of the Torah. Does that mean you shouldn't do the Torah? No, no, you still should do it. I believe that um, there will be more heavenly rewards uh, and earthly the more obedient you are to Him, and the better life will go here on earth and eternally. And in the Bible, it says in Romans 3:20, 3:30, it is one Elohim who shall declare right the circumcised by belief, and the uncircumcised through belief, because our heart gets circumcised. Do we nullify the Torah through the belief? Like, just because we have faith in Yeshua, then do we not need to do the Torah? Like, is that what's being said here? And he's like, Paul's like, no. He's like, on the contrary, we're saying that the Torah is right. We establish the Torah, or the law, your Bible might say. So if you really believe in Him, you'll really do what He says. In Romans 4, Abraham justified by faith. And it says that, this is Paul speaking, that Abraham believed Elohim, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. And to him who is working, the reward is not reckoned as a favor, but as a debt. So if I'm just doing it, basing it on my works, going, God, look, do you see all that I have done for you? Like, you are indebted to me because you have to save me, because look at all the good that I've done. Probably not the right attitude, or is not the right attitude to have. And so in Romans 4, verse 11, the Bible says that the father of circumcision, to those who not only are of circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the belief which our father Abraham had in uncircumcision. Again, talking about walking, you're walking out the commands of what, uh, the Torah is what what it is to be revealed. It is getting revealed and more as time went on. But Abraham, walked out in what he knew, even though he was uncircumcised at that point in time. And so, but his heart was circumcised. And it says in Romans 4:13 that the promise is realized through faith. And it says, not to Abraham or to his seed through Torah was the blessings given, but through a righteousness of belief. For those who are of the Torah are heirs. Um, for the Torah works out wrath, and when there is no Torah, there is no transgression or sin. So the Torah again teaches us what sin is. And it says here, where there is no Torah, there is no transgression. And in the earth, when I look around, I'm still seeing a lot of sin. I'm seeing a lot of demonic, unclean spirit manifestation in people because of sin. Why? because the Torah still exists. It's still in play. And it says not only to those who are of the Torah, but also those who are of the belief of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So again, the question, is there still sin in the world? Yes. So per Romans 4:15, well then, the Torah still exists. I hope that's pretty clear. Like you can, ping me later. You think not. So the summary basically is we do the Torah not to earn our salvation because we can't. If you got one sin, you're pretty much discounted. But because we do the Torah because we are saved, we do put our faith in Yeshua to prove that we are saved, that we believe enough and have enough faith to actually be obedient to Yah's written and living word, that we understand that his word's perfect. Being obedient to the Torah, even when we don't understand, we're like, why can't we mix, two different types of fabric? Why can you plant two different seeds? All this type of stuff. It's like, what kind of, okay, I'll do it. I'll get it. We aren't under the Torah, under the law, meaning we don't get our authority from the Torah by works righteousness, but we get our authority by being sons and daughters because of our faith in Yeshua, by following his example. That's where we get our authority from, not from the Torah. And I got a few verses here that talks about works. Not going to go over that so much. Okay, there they are though, if you want to see them. Let's see, do I want to go over this? What does it mean to be one with God? I think I might save that for a Q&A. I think so. But here's the question that a viewer posed to me on Facebook, which I thought was a good question. And he was asking, hey, per John 17, verse 11, and I am no more in the world, this is Yeshua speaking, but these are in the world, and I come to set apart, Father, to guard them, being us, his disciples, his chosen ones, although he chooses everyone. It's just whether we respond. To guard them in your name, which you have given me, so that they might be one as we are. You know what? I think I actually will go over this. I think I will. So let's do that. And let me. Okay. So as you can see, I like to write things out. Actually, didn't mean to close that so early. Let's do this. There, open that up again. Okay. Pull that up in a minute. What does it mean to be one with God? All right, so this is going to be good. You're going to like it. So, just to give a little context there, in John 17, verse 6, this is Yeshua speaking. He says, I have revealed your name, meaning the name of Father God, Yahweh. And it's not just saying the name. When you say the name in the Hebrew thought, the name has a lot to do with the character of the person. And so when you say Yahweh, Yah, you have to recognize it as reverent because of all that it comes all that it means. It's not just saying a word. And so, anyways, Yeshua reveals the name to the men that Father Yah gave to Yeshua. And he says, these people, these disciples, the apostles, they have guarded your word. Because the words which you gave me, I've given to them. And they believed that you sent me. And so Yeshua says this interesting thing. Well, let me go back because Yeshua, we got to remember, he is the written and the living word. Here's something you might want to consider. I've been going through some courts of heaven session in some of the sessions I've been doing with people. And sometimes we have to do the courtrooms of heaven. And I pray when I start to open up the books that are in heaven and in hell, that everything that's in them that, needs to be revealed. Um, because everything in heaven's written down in books. The Bible has a few things to say about that. We might even be books ourselves, because if you think about it, Yeshua's the word, the written word. And so, just a thought. You may have a book that in heaven that tells all about you. Um, Even your destiny and what Yah wants to do in your life. Um, okay, so Yeshua is saying, I don't pray for the world. I'm not praying for everyone. I'm just praying for those that you have given me. Interesting. Um, and then he says, look, and all mine are yours, and all yours are mine. So Yeshua is basically saying, hey, we're kind of on equal footing here. And I have been glorified, esteemed in them. And he says, I am no more in the world, but these are in the world. And I come to you, set apart Father. Guard them in your name, which you have given me, so that they may be one as we are. So again, Yeshua equating himself to be one with the Father. And, and he wants us to be one with them. Does that mean that we are God? Hardly. No. You may have an aspect of him in you, but we got a lot of sinless. We have a lot of sin in us, and not condemning you, but Yeshua is the only one that was sinless. And so I'm going to start by looking at the starting verses with the most important prayer of Judaism, which is called the Shema. I didn't realize till I did this that the Shema had all these other, uh, verses and chapters and stuff in it. I just thought it was Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Anyways, but this is one of the most important prayers that the Orthodox Jewish people will say. Hear, O Israel. He's speaking to Israel as one. Yah, God, our Elohim, Yahweh is one. And you shall love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart, with all your being, with all your might. Have you heard that before? It's kind of like Yeshua is just repeating what Yah, God, has said before. And so this is why the Orthodox Jews they have a hard time sometimes accepting Yeshua. Anyways, or at least that one back then, they're like, you're equating yourself to be God. So now as Christians, we believe in the Godhead being Father Yah, God, the Son, Yeshua, and the Holy Spirit. And I've heard it explained this way that if you had God the Father and he breathes, he speaks something, which is by the power of the Holy Spirit, and he can see almost the words like the breath, like on a cold day, you see the smoke come out from you, that is coming from his being. And those words that were from him that, you know, are him, again, we're talking about It's not just saying the word Yahweh, it's the characters, everything that it embodies. That smoke that comes out was actually Yeshua. It's actually a part of him. It came out from him. And so these are all different parts of the Godhead, just they're just come out in different ways or different forms. They have different responsibilities. Even when praying to Father Yah, to praying to Yeshua, they have different roles and different titles. And so I'll do a teaching on that someday. Anyways, and I'm not going to cover, a lot of the verses that equate the members of the Godhead being one. There's a lot of them. But again, John 17:11. But here's a few verses to consider when we are invited to be one with Yah, one with God. In Ephesians 4, verse 4, there's a lot of oneness going on here that says, there's one body, there's one spirit, and you were called in one expectation of your calling. One master, there's one faith, one belief, one immersion, one Elohim and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. I think that was the southern. I live in the southeast United States, so there's a lot of y'all and y'allins going on, and not like yous guys. It's y'allins, y'all, and so yeah, I guess they're from southern Israel or something. I don't know. And again, this kind of again speaks to me against dispensationalism, which says, oh, there's different covenants and this, that, and the other. No. Um, Another way to look at being one is considering two people in a covenant marriage, which the Bible states in Mark 10:6, hey, when you consummate, you get married, you're no longer two, you're one flesh. We also see that in Genesis 2, verse 24. He created them male, female, they became one. We also see this if you sleep with a harlot in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 16. Uh, Even though it's not per Yah, kosher, you still can create a covenant by other means, um, by doing rituals or acts, such as sleeping with a harlot. But it's not just limited to that. Anyways, you know, um, but if you sleep with a prostitute, the two will become one flesh. And so in Galatians, we see that Yah, God, doesn't really differentiate so much between people, even if there are differences between people groups. In Galatians 3, verse 27, it says, hey, there's neither Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free nor male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, of course, Israel was the chosen people, that they were given the oracles of God, the Torah and stuff like that. So even though there's different roles that people may have, he still kind of looks at us all the same. It's just you might have a different job than someone else, a different function. And many times in the Bible, there is a plurality of one, such as, again, when Yah God refers to the nation of Israel. He's referring to them collectively. Um, we even see this in Romans, where it's talking about we're all members of the same body. You might be uh, an eye, you might be a hand, you might be a foot. You have different functions, but collectively, we're all the same body. But beyond that, what does it mean to be one with Yah, with God? And so, well, we know that we're called to be like Yeshua, Jesus, as he is the goal of the Torah, not the end of the law, as some Bibles say. If you look at that word in Greek, it can also mean like goal. And so, again, Romans 10:4, for Christ is the goal of the law of righteousness. the games unclean spirits play. So I saw recently this great like a 40-minute teaching by Dr. Michael Heiser on what is the image of God. It just happened to be my feed. I'm like, let me check this out. And it was really good. And so he's talking about, and I think it applies to the question that's being given here is, what does it mean to be one with Yah? What does it mean to be one with God? And in Genesis 1:26, he's saying, let us make man in our image. You're going to have to watch it because I don't want to steal all of Dr. Heiser's thunder, and I can't explain it as well as he does. He says that in this, and it kind of makes sense, that he's not talking to the rest of the Godhead because they're already on the same page. If you're talking to one, you're basically talking to the others. And so he's like, he's not talking to the other members of the Godhead. He's talking to the others that are, to the other messengers and such, other possible, human spirits that are in the supernatural realm, the spirit realm. And so, but again, they can't create, they can't really, but he's kind of saying, hey, like, we're going to do this because it goes here from the plural to then the singular. So God created man in his image, in the image of God, he created them. So again, it's Yah, God doing the creation here. But the focus here is on the word in. Sometimes a word, sometimes a letter in the original Hebrew text can make a world of difference. And again, Dr. Heiser gives this in detail. And he says, okay, well, let's look at the word in. If I say I put the dishes in the sink, that's talking about location. If I say I wrote the letter in pencil, that's kind of talking about the mechanics. If I say I broke the vase in pieces, that's another use of the word in. If I say I work in ministry, it's actually describing a function or a role. Okay, interesting. Again, I'm just giving you the skinny on this. He does a much better job. And so, and he ends with this statement right here. Dr. Michael Heiser says, so God created man in his own image, is how most translations have this. He goes, I'm going to suggest that we need to think of the image as a function or role rather than quality or attribute inside a person because those qualities and attributes are not unique. And he explains that, does it pretty well, pretty funny actually. Humans don't possess them equally, and they can be perceived as being even lost, like again, the coma situation. The image is something that's a function. So ultimately, we are called to have, and this is where I start jumping in with my stuff. We are called to have one mind and one heart. It says that in Philippians 2, verse 1. That you can see here, if then there's any encouragement in Messiah, the Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of spirit, if any affection, compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, having the same love, one in being and purpose. And Paul says other places, he's like, imitate me as I imitate Christ. So again, the Yeshua, Jesus, is the goal of the Torah. And so, and that is to say, we're to have the mind and the heart of Yeshua himself, who was one with the Father, as it states in John 10, verse 30. Ultimately, we are called to be Yah's, God's representatives on earth, to live and speak as if it were him, to be comforted be conformed to the image of Yeshua and Jesus. So in our situations, we see that Yeshua, he had a lot of stuff coming against him. And, he never played the victim. He did what he thought the Father wanted him to do. He would call things out. He would go hang out with those that, were the prostitutes, were those that were, the alcoholics, stuff like that. He would do things much differently than we might tend to think. And so, you know, he was very he was very careful with his words. And we have to be the same way. Uh, as if, if God were in the situation, what would he do? If Yeshua, what would he do? And it says in Colossians 3:9, put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. In Colossians 3:17, it says, we see in a mirror the esteem, the glory of Yah, God, and we're being transformed into the same likeness from glory to glory, from esteem to esteem, as from Yah, God, the Spirit. In Romans 8, verse 10, and Messiah is in you. Because once we accept him, he comes to live in our house, which is our body, us, our being. And it says, if the spirit of him who has raised Yeshua from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Messiah from the dead shall also give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit dwelling in you. So if we have, Yeshua and his spirit in us, and the spirit raised Yeshua from the dead, that means you should be able to raise people from the dead. That's what that's saying. If we look at ourselves too much and we're like, I can't do that, it's because our focus is wrong. And so sometimes we might think, well, we're not righteous enough. Well, there could be a little bit there, but really it's the belief, the we have to believe when Yeshua, Jesus, when he did all these miracles, uh, walking on water, um, doing all kinds of stuff, raising people from the dead, he did it as fully human. He did not do it as a member of the Godhead, which is why in the wilderness, um, Satan was trying to tempt him, like, hey, can you make these rocks turn into bread? Can you, throw yourself down the steps? And because it says in the Bible that the angels will keep you. Because what Satan was trying to do was like, look, I want you to uh, live, to express yourself as a member of the Godhead. And Yeshua saw right through it, and he's like, nope, not going to do it. Because he knew that if he did, well, then he would kind of, mess things up. And he's like, no, I got to do this fully as human. Even when Yeshua was on the stake, when they were trying to give him, something to deaden the pain, he was like, mm-mm. He's like, I need to take the full brunt of this. And so, but if his spirit's within us, you know, if there's a storm coming, are you going to be able to speak to the storm and say, in the name of Yeshua, you stop, you will not pass this point? Or if there's a fire or something like that, if someone needs to get, is hurt and you're nowhere near a hospital, can you pray to have that person healed? Does that necessarily mean it's going to work every time? Maybe not, but you need to have the faith to at least try. That's your job, is to have faith, and his job to give results. And it says in Philippians 2, verse 5, let this mind be in you that Yeshua, did not regard equality with Elohim, with God, being a matter to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men. Kind of like what we were saying, you know, Yeshua was like, I got to do this as a human, and I cannot consider myself to be equal with God. Um, Otherwise, he would not have been a good example for us, which is what he came to be. So it's very easy for a person to call themselves a Christian, but it's much actually harder to live like one. And so I'm going to read these last verses, and I'm going to explain why I'm kind of ending on this note after that. In 2 Corinthians 5:14, the Bible says, "For the love of Messiah compels us, having judged this, that if one died for all, then all died. And he died for all. For those who live shall no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised." Again, we have our own plans and ideas, stuff like that. They're probably not as good as his. They're definitely not as good as his. And so we have our ways of doing things. Yes. Anyways. And then in 2 Corinthians 5:16, the Bible says, "So from now onwards, we know no one according to the flesh." Interesting. "And if we have known Messiah according to the flesh, yet now we no longer know him thus. Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he is a renewed creature." Okay. Noe, why did you put that there? There we go. Okay. So in being one with Yeshua, again, we saw that, again, the Godhead's all one. Um, we're called to be one. Yeshua is the goal of the Torah. We're called to die to flesh. We're called to uh, live by the Spirit. And then at the end there, um, the people were saying, look, we don't want to know anyone anymore by the flesh. And I made that one comment like, it's very easy for a person to call themselves a Christian. We look at the United States, and there's a lot of people that profess to be Christians, which is on the decline, or hopefully it's on the upswing after the whole Charlie Kirk thing. Saw some article that some of the younger generations is turning back to the Bible and such. Yay. But anyways, for quite a while, the U.S. has sent out missionaries and stuff like that to other countries. But at the same point in time, we got Hollywood pushing a different agenda. We've got a lot of abortions. We got all kinds of killings, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So, and in large part, the church, myself included, has allowed this to happen, which is why we're paying the price. And so, at some point in time, again, I believe that tribulation is not too far away. How far? I don't know. But I think it'll be a lot sooner than people want it to be. And it's very easy for a person to call themselves a believer. So when times get tough, and let's say believers are getting, you know, rounded up, you got you know, who knows, government against you, wherever you are, um, with all their technology and all this stuff like that. Um, And we're going to feel like I believe that we're kind of going back to the book of Acts at some point in time, where there's going to be small little pockets of you know of believers. So what's going to happen if someone comes to you and they're like, "Oh, I believe in Christ." And this is kind of why I'm big on spiritual activation and growing your discernment, because you may not be able to trust that person. They might be a mole, they might be a spy. Which is why we're told to we're called to be fruit checkers, as I heard one person to say. You have to see the fruit in their life, and sometimes that fruit takes a while to grow. You may not know it right off the bat unless, you know, you have some spiritual discernment, which will help. Um, but even then, that's kind of tricky because sometimes we can see what we want to see. And so, which is why I'm trying to help people develop that discernment now. So that way you can kind of work your way through some of those pitfalls, learn what, his voice is, what, his visions are, as opposed to your own soul imagination. Because even the Bible talks about how there were prophets that spoke out of gave their own visions that they saw, which were incorrect. And so, as we saw, at the end there, to be one with Yeshua is to live as he lived, to follow the Torah, but to also have that spiritual discernment, be able to allow the Spirit to work through us. So I think that helps, or I hope that helps rather. And I just pray that this blesses you. So I don't see any questions right now. So I think I'm going to let it go on that note. But if you watch this later, if you have any questions, let me know. And just know maybe your miracle could be next. And we'll see you again um, in around 2 weeks. So, and I'll try to get a little bit better on the notifications. I got this one out at the last minute. So, but this is Noe with Walk with Yah. And I pray that this blesses you. Try to get the message out. Try to live the life He has for you. If you're in a tough situation, He has a plan. He's not just, Yeshua is not just sitting on the sidelines like, I don't know what to do. We just have to go to Him, ask for that guidance, kind of die to ourselves. There might be stuff that's oppressing us that keeps us from hearing Him. Um, and you're going to have to learn how to work through that and work on, getting cleaned up. Um, Anyways, I pray this helps. Shalom.